one of the things we talk about is teaching people this idea of what's called a prototype. Don't try to predict the future or the outcome, prototype. And we teach people a process for doing it. It's actually pretty simple, but we just aren't used to doing it. And prototypes are safe, modest, playful experiments. I learned this from working with some folks in the Silicon Valley, innovators in the tech area. They have this phrase like, fail fast, learn fast. Fail fast, learn fast. And a venture capitalist said, and fail cheap, it's my money, right? Right? So what we start to tell people is what most of us do when we talk about experimenting is we talk about stuff like, we're going to do an experiment, we're going to tear down all of our buildings, and we're going to change our name from First Lutheran to the Flood, and we're going to try to reach this new generation, and you've just disrupted everybody. And we're like, what's the smallest thing you could do that you're curious about? Like, get playful out. Like, what could we experiment? What could we be curious about? And let's see what we can learn. The key to a prototype is not asking, did it work? Matter of fact, when we coach people, in our consulting work, we tell people we're banning the phrase, did it work? Instead, you ask, so what did we learn? Because learning actually makes you more resilient, and learning makes you more playful, and learning, people actually feel young when they're learning. They feel excited about learning, like I'm learning this new thing, I'm trying this new thing. And most of us stop learning because it feels foolish not to know. Like, I don't know. Like, how do you say this word in this? How do you say this word in this? How do you think? If you ever traveled, right? It's something really beautiful about getting to the playful side. So I'm going to tell you, I wasn't going to tell you the story, but I'm going to tell you the story now. So when I was pastoring the church, I had a worship leader in my church who was 29. Her name is Brianne. We loved her, and she was an amazing worship leader, and she was turning 30. And it was her 30th birthday. And for her 30th birthday, she was throwing a birthday party, and she invited our whole church staff, including me. And I went home and told my wife, there's no way we're going to the birthday party because she's being very kind, but a whole group of 29-year-olds don't need Brianne's pastor and boss showing up at the party. Talk about we're the party killers, right? Like, we show up and everybody's like, oh dear, how that great. Here, cheers, right? So as I said, okay, we are not going. I love Brianne. We're going to do her a gift of not going to her birthday party because we'll kill that party. And so Brianne knew that I was thinking that. She calls my wife and says to Beth, please, I want you and Todd to come. Please come to the party. I've invited lots of folks. I'm sure it'll be fine. I said, okay. I don't want to disappoint her, so we're going to make a dinner reservation for like half an hour after the party starts, and we're going to tell her, so sorry, we have another engagement we have to go to, and we're going to sneak in. No one's going to know us. Like, this is a bunch of 29-year-olds who are friends of Brianne. No one's going to know us. We're going to sneak in. We're going to give her the gift. We're going to give her a big hug, and we're going to sneak out before people figure out that the pastor and the boss was there, and we're going to get out the door. So we come in, and we sneak in the door, and open the door, and the entire room goes, Pastor Todd, you came! I knew everybody in that room. They were not only friends of Brianne, they were all people who had grown up in my church. And none of them came to our church. And I sat there and went, oh, this is even worse. The whole night, everybody's going to be like coming up to us feeling really guilty that they don't go to the church anymore. So we got to get out of here. So I go sneaking in, hi, nice to see you all. Don't worry, we're not staying. And people are walking up, and what we realized is they walked up and says, oh, we heard you were coming. We want to get time with you. We were hoping that we could get a chance to talk, maybe during the midst of the karaoke. I don't like karaoke. We'll go over and we'll talk over here. It was stunning. Like, everybody wanted to see us, and they were thrilled to see us, and we were completely thrown off by it. And Brianne said, don't you get it? I invited all these people. They want to see you. And I'm like, I don't get it, but okay, we'll stay. And we stayed, and we had a lovely time. And I was completely confused all night long. Finally, on Monday, I go into Brianne's office, and I tell her the story, and she goes, I know. And now you know why I didn't sleep all weekend. Because now you know that I can't even get my friends to go to this church. And I think you hired me to help reach that next generation, and I can't do it. And I said to her, Brianne, now there's two things I know. One is they love you, and two is now I know they like me. So it's not us. And I still don't know what it is. So let's try an experiment. And what we did is I said to them, if you would get 6 people from that party who would agree to meet with me, and we'll gather and I'll buy the pizza, and I just want to ask them questions about their lives. I will not guilt them. I will not shame them. I will not try to recruit them to come back to church. No programs, nothing. I just want to ask them about them. And those 6 people, that turned into 3 gatherings. It cost me 3 pizzas, and we figured out why we were having such a hard time reaching young adults, the young adults who'd come to our church. And now we knew what to do. The experiment was I bought a pizza, and we listened to them, and we learned. And I'm not telling you what we learned, because that's not the point. The point is the process. Most of us think if I get the answer, that'll change. It's not the answer, it's the process. And we started realizing that's what we had to change. It wasn't, I hired her because she's the expert and she's winsome and she's great. That didn't work. I thought, oh, it must be me, I have to change. That didn't work. We actually found it was something totally different. And now we knew what to do. But it started by doing a simple experiment. It cost me 3 pizzas. That's what it cost me to get that information, 3 pizzas. What small experiments can you do? Most of us are convinced that if we just try harder, paddle harder, outwork it, we'll get there. It's not try harder, it's train differently. It's learn a different way of leading. It starts by learning. Now, the second problem that most good leaders make is they believe that if everybody trusts me, if I have great credibility and everybody trusts my leadership, that will lead to transformation. Transformation is really, really important. This is the way I think about leadership. Leadership is energizing a group of people toward their own transformation in order to accomplish a shared mission. This is what makes leadership different than, say, management. I'm not a person who thinks that management is less than leadership. As you know, the person who manages my company is amazing. I think they're 2 different skill sets. But most of us think if we are good managers, then people will trust us as leaders, and they're not the same thing. Management is about taking care of the things entrusted to your care. Biblically, management is stewardship. So I always said when I was a pastor, and it seemed like every 18 months I was having to get a new youth leader because they were always leaving, I realized I wasn't looking for a new youth leader. I was looking for a new youth steward, a youth manager. You take 10 kids to camp, you got to bring 10 kids home. And it's got to be the same 10 kids, right? They've been entrusted to your care, right? Nobody cares what happened if you lost one of them along the way, right? The manager tells Moses on the other side of the Red Sea, hey, that Red Sea thing, that was amazing. That's part in the Red Sea. We should talk about that every week over dinner. I've checked the maps, and I've talked to locals, and Google Maps tells us that we can make it from here to that place called the Promised Land in about 6 weeks of hard marching. I've organized the whole thing. The leader knows it takes 40 years, and not everybody's going to get there. Because we have to be transformed into a people who God can use in that promised land. That's the difference, transformation. Now, let's be really clear. There is no transformation without trust. The way to put it, we put it, is no one's going to trust you off the map if they didn't trust you on the map. There is no transformation without trust. So if you are not trustworthy with scriptures, or with souls, or with money, or with meetings. You know, if people, how many times is somebody going to show up at the church because, oh, I forgot to tell you the meeting was canceled? Boom, they're out. They're not going to trust you with their schedules if you're not trustworthy. There's all these things. There are things you've been asked to do. Our trust is actually built by our technical competence. And trust is really important. And you know this, when trust is gone, the journey is over. I mean, we've seen this. There are mega churches that have just gone down in no time. I mean, just go watch the Christianity Today podcast on the thing, right? You can have 20 years of explosive, lots of people, book deals. 1 month, that whole church is done, shut down. I had 2 different clients who went through crisis like that. When your clients end up on 60 Minutes, that's not a good thing. And we were the ones who were come in when they were trying to figure out, what do we do now? How do we rebuild trust? And then what does our future look like? That's a lot of our work. There is no transformation without trust. You have to be trustworthy. So let's be real clear about that. We are not skipping around that. That's about your competence. It's about your character. All that's true. But trust is not transformation. In the same way that good leaders think, if I work hard enough, then we'll get transformation, we also think, if I'm just trusted enough, if I stay here long enough, if I make sure that we're doing well, that people trust who I am. I said that there's an old mindset. Secure leaders maintain a big trust account. Long as we trust you, long as you're doing great. And the problem is that trust is a little bit like having a big bank account when you're trying to do a building project. You need the money in the bank to do the building project, but you can't sleep in the bank, right? You can't have youth ministry in the bank. You got to do the building project, which means you have to invest the trust in the transformation. Adaptive change is all about transformation. And that transformation of lives, that transformation of organizations, that transformation that comes from shifting our values and our attitudes and our behaviors, that change is at the heart of the work. And that change requires the investment of trust. So let me help you think of it this way. The fundamental task of leadership, the simplest task of leadership, the most basic task is a discernment task. I would say the spirituality of discernment is the most important spiritual formation practice for a leader. And really what you're doing is you're discerning, what do we preserve and what do we change? What do we preserve and what do we change? And every decision you make, whether you know it or not, you're reinforcing one of the two. We're going to preserve this, we're going to change this. We're doing the men's breakfast again, first Sunday of the month. We're preserving the men's breakfast. We're letting somebody else, instead of doing the men's breakfast, we're letting somebody do beer and Bible. We're changing that. Preserve, change. That's the dynamic all the time. And that's difficult because what most of us want is to figure out, and you need to figure out what is so important that you will preserve it forever. There are certain things that are really important to preserve. If we don't preserve those things, we stop being who we are, but it can't be everything. So let me give you an example of what one church thought was so important to preserve. They etched it in stone. And because it's my tribe, Presbyterians, I get to pick on them. Now, here's what you need to know about this church. Just look at this for a second. See this picture? This church in the 1940s, Billy Graham called it the leading church in America. I know the person who was the pastor of this church in the 1970s. He passed away this week, and I was just thinking about him. And I also coached the person who was the pastor of this church before COVID. So I know the history of this church. This church was founded in the 1800s, and in 1910, they decided to build their grand, glorious cathedral. They were filled with industrialists. This is a northeastern city. Industrialists, the kinds of people who went and toured Europe, like on Titanic, but not in steerage, like up above. And they came back and said, our city deserves to have a grand cathedral. Not just New York City, but our city too. And so they built one. They got Tiffany to do his own stained glass windows. They got Tiffany stained glass windows done by Tiffany. They have mahogany panels, which is real mahogany. They have the portraits of all the people. You can tour this church today like you could tour Westminster Abbey. It's there. But when they were deciding what to put over the door, that's what this picture is, so that every guest would see it, they etched in stone. Now, you got to know this about Presbyterians. First of all, we do everything by committee. So you can't blame it on any person. There was a group of people who got together, passed a motion, and decided this is what we're having. And the second is we're cheap. We're not spending one dime more than we need to. But until Jesus comes back, over the door, it would say, the First Presbyterian Church. They paid for the, like they're the Ohio State University or something, right? They paid for the. They didn't say where, right? They're not going to pay for the city name. Why? Why would we? If you don't know where you are, who's going to see this unless you're standing underneath it? So we're not paying for that. No. If you don't know where you are, you got bigger problems than we can cover at church this morning. And until Jesus comes back, there will be a morning service at 10:45 and an evening service at 7:45. And we don't have to say when, do we? Because everybody knows that's Sunday morning, right? I said to the Seventh-day Adventists. Now, here's what's interesting. My friend who pastored this church in the 1970s, he was a young pastor. His first job was to kill the evening service. Why? because even though that evening service had gone on for 70 years and had been etched in stone over the door for 60, it had been disrupted by this new technology that came out in the 1970s called 60 Minutes. When the 60 Minutes television show became the #1 television show in America, it changed TV viewing habits. Sunday night became TV family night for people who had televisions. So my wife and I are unequally yoked. She grew up in a CBS family watching 60 Minutes and World at War. I grew up in an NBC family watching Wonderful World of Disney and Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. But everybody was watching television, and so it disrupted the evening service. So he had to kill that. And the guy that I coached before COVID, he had 4 services in 3 different nights in 3 different languages, something these folks would never have imagined. Now, I tell this for this reason. When you're making decisions that are hard to make, the goal isn't to get it perfectly. 100 years from now, whatever you decide this week, they're going to be laughing at you about. But it's about discerning, what do you preserve and what do you change? And the way you do so is the way in which you end up investing trust in transformation. Not squandering, not hoarding, but investing. So remember, we talked about technical problems and adaptive challenges. When you solve a technical problem, you build trust. That's what you're doing. If someone comes to you and says, "Pastor, come to my house and be with me. My wife is sick," and you go and you give pastoral care, they trust you. That's good. "Pastor, I don't understand this part of the scripture," and you explain it to them. They trust you. You lead them to Christ. You lead them into deeper faith. They trust you. It's great. It's important. If you use your technical skills, it builds trust. But most of us who have become trustworthy leaders think that's enough. If we just keep solving everybody's problems, that'll be enough. Adaptive challenges are where the transformation happens. And it's when you hit an adaptive challenge, there's a big difference between being a person who says, "I don't know," after they know that you have given them all you know. Like if you're a trustworthy leader who can stand there in front of people and say, "We're going to experiment our way through," that's really different than if you haven't been a person who's shown up or been around them. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone read one of my books and say, "We're trying to lead our church off the map." And I'll get a call. We'll start working with them, and I'll get a call from one of the elders, or somebody will say, "We wonder why we have to make all these changes. We think if you just spend more time working on his sermons, we might be better." Now, I don't think he's going to out-preach the problems of this world, but if your sermons aren't good, no one's going to listen to you. Trust and transformation go together. So assuming for a second that we're sitting in this room and that we're the kinds of people who want to have high trust accounts. We want to be competent. We want to be people of good character. We talk about competence and relational congruence. And we're trying really hard. And maybe we've actually been here a long time. We've had a long tenure. This is one of the challenges I have when I talk to Methodists. They're moving every 18 months to 3 years all the time. How can you build trust in a world like that? It's hard. We're working really hard to be as trustworthy as possible. What does it take to invest trust in transformation? And we have a process we take you through. So this is the little green book, and I'm just going to walk you through this process. And it's a process that actually starts with believing that there's some healthy things to be in a church that is helpful, and how you build it from there. And this is actually our larger strategic planning process. We use this little book, same process we used when we helped Baylor University do their most recent strategic plan. We worked with it, we're working right now with Wycliffe Bible translators. They have a crisis. You know what Wycliffe Bible translators' crisis is? In 2028, they're going to finish their job. There will be no unreached people groups without a Bible in 2028. It's all going to be finished. And their leadership came to us and said, "We now have to ask the question about what's next for us. We don't know. Do we just fold up shop? Or is there something else that we've learned in all these years that we can contribute?" And we're doing a strategic planning process for them to prepare for that crisis, a good crisis. It doesn't matter what it is, anything about a changing world. What are the mountains? What's changed? What's different? What's the shifts we need to make? What are the losses we need to face? And it looks like this. Here's the process. I'm going to walk you through it quickly. You can get the little book. You can begin to have this conversation. This is where we end up helping a lot of folks because they can use some help. But it's built around 2 questions. And the questions are a little complicated, so I'm going to slow down and try to make sure you get the 2 questions. The first question is, how might our charism, talk about that word, how might our charism address the pain points of our community as an expression of God's mission in the world? Notice what it doesn't say. What are your dreams? What are your hopes? What are the things that you want to do? What is your passion? What is your vision? Matter of fact, I believe today vision is overrated. I was trained to be a person who believed that leaders cast vision. I now think we live in a world that is so filled with fog that vision is the wrong place to start. Instead, you start talking about your charism, your gift. How might our charism address the pain points of our community? Remember the curve? The new curve starts with need. What is the need in our community? What is the pain outside that requires us to transform inside? How might our charism address the pain points of our community as an expression of God's mission in the world? And then second, how might that inspire us to faithfully change and grow? So again, you can go home this week and you can begin to have these conversations. So let me tell you, here's how you do it. Here's just to walk you through. This is going to be very technique-y, give you stuff that you can actually work on, and then we'll debrief it. So the first thing you have to do is create a holding environment. We're going to talk about creating a holding environment. Holding environment comes from the work of Heifetz and Linsky adapted work that came out of psychology around this. Holding environment is basically this. It means that when you're trying to bring change, you can't do it by yourself. One of my friends puts it this way: if you're the only one losing sleep about your church, don't start changing anything yet. Pray for other people to lose sleep. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you're the only one worrying about it, pray that other people will start worrying about it. You need other people with you. Remember, Lewis and Clark were together. They were co-captains. It's the last time in American history that a military unit was a shared command. Co-captains. It's much more like the biblical model than it is the military model, right? Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas, Barnabas and Saul, right? It's much more similar to that shared. If you're the only person, then you don't have it. You need a holding environment. And a holding environment are the group of people that you trust together to take on this work together. It doesn't have to be, and oftentimes isn't, the assigned leaders. What we'd like to think is, it'll be our board, or it'll be our staff. Very often, we'll talk about this more if you'd like to, staff are actually the most resistant people to change. Because staff were hired for the old problem. You hired a bunch of canoers, because what we had was water to get across. And now you're realizing you're telling them, oh, by the way, we don't need your canoeing anymore. And so they work really hard to keep paddling. What you're looking for is people who actually want to join you in the journey. A holding environment is the kind of relational connection that of the people we trust to do this work together. So I always say, find people, be really committed if you're creating a holding environment to finding people who you do not have to grow up and you don't have to inspire. There are people that you need to grow up. There are people you need to challenge and change and instruct. That's part of our job. But you want to start with the mature and the motivated. What you look for in your leadership, and for some of you, this is going to be like, the rest of the day, you're going to be done right here. Because you're going to be like, I don't have anybody. Right. How you know you're ready to go off the map is that you've got people who are mature and motivated. My president, Mark Labradon, when I first went to Fuller Seminary as the vice president, he gave a speech to the entire faculty and staff. And he basically said, I need you to do 2 things. There's 2 things I cannot provide for you as the president of the seminary. One is, I need you to be adults. I need you to take responsibility for yourself. I need you to be people who show up on time, work hard, be trustworthy, turn in your reports. If we have to monitor you, that doesn't work. In my little company, we have a basic rule of thumb that basically says, if I ever have to manage you, I'm firing you. Like, I do not want to have to manage you. I got to trust that you're going to use your time, you're going to use our money. You can spend company money as long as it's done for the good of the company. I do not care. We do not keep track of it. If you come to me and tell me that I need to buy 25 books to give them to people to talk about our work, buy 25 books and give them to people. I need you to be responsible. You know you have teammates, partners, people that you can do this work with when you have people who start by being responsible adults. And if you don't have them, then what you need to do is keep building trust. You know the transformation begins to happen when you've got Lewis and Clark. And what Lewis and Clark needed was Sacagawea. They realized when they were going off the map, they were going into Shoshone territory. They knew if nothing else, they needed a translator. What they realized was for all the expertise that they had, they didn't have everything they needed, so they weren't ready to go off the map until they added her. You have to keep thinking, who are the people on my team? It doesn't have to be a huge team, but if you're the only person trying to lead change by yourself, this is the moment when you say to Rick and to the bishop, look, we're trying to bring change, but there's stuff we've got to do until we're ready. This is when you know you're not ready, is if you're the only one that's losing sleep over it. If not, let me just say, put a finer point on this. If you try to bring change without having a holding environment, you will become the technical solution for their adaptive challenge. Think of how often you'll hear a church say something like this. We want to reach young families. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a young pastor with young kids. And usually that means a male pastor with kids. And you know why? Because when we get a young pastor, they'll attract young kids, and they'll be great, and we'll have young families come to the church. And that young pastor walks in and goes, great, you brought me here to bring young families. Here's what we're going to need to change. They go, no, we're not changing anything else. All we did is we wanted you to come. You bring them. We're not changing anything. I can't tell you how many times I've had leaders at that moment go, I'm the technical solution to their adaptive challenge. They need to shift their values, attitudes, or behaviors. They want me to do it. What do we pay you for? Right? You're not ready until you have a holding environment. That means a group of people who together hold the anxiety of the group, hold the energy of the group. I say it, and that's why I said mature and motivated. I need you to be adults, Mark Labradon said, and I need you to be Christians. I need you to actually show up as people of faith and own your own faith. I said, you live at a seminary, no one at the seminary is going to disciple you. Your job is to show up as Christians for the students. And what happens is transformation happens through heat. So the way to think about this is, I always say, if you ever cook with like a Dutch oven, like a big old cast iron Dutch oven, the think about the transformation we're talking about is how do you take raw meat and vegetables and, I'm Italian, wine, and you put that all together, and if the right amount of heat over the right amount of time, you get a feast. But if you walk in and go, this isn't changing fast enough, and you crank it up, you will scorch the bottom of it before it's cooked. And a bunch of us as leaders, that's what we do. We get anxious, and we turn up the heat. Right amount of heat over the right amount of time. What does heat mean? Necessary urgency. Hey, we are in trouble, and I'm not the only one who thinks it. We do have to bring change. We're not reaching our neighborhoods. No, we are in the midst of decline. We're not as relevant. Heat, necessary, urgency. Not, we're going to die tomorrow, and so we bring it up. Not because the anxiety of the leader who's like, this is not going to die on my watch, right? It's the right, appropriate amount of heat. Heat that ends up in appropriate, healthy conflict. You and I might disagree. And that's how we're going to get to better things. It's that person sitting here, what do we pay you for? And me getting calm enough to be able to say, you pay me to stand here with you. Because what I need for us to transform isn't for me to go and solve your problem. I need you to step into it with me. Healthy, it's like the right amount of heat over the right amount of time. Too much cranked up heat burns. And so many of us now believe, well, we don't want the church to be uncomfortable for anybody. So what we'll do is we'll put the stew at 1 degree above room temperature. And just hope that over a long period of time, it'll just cook. And what you know is it'll go spoil before it's transformed. It gets toxic. And most of our churches are more toxic because of the lack of conflict. One of my people on my team is working on a whole project. Her doctoral project, which will probably end up being a book, is all on what she calls the problem of loyalty cultures. Loyalty in an organization is usually a sign of dysfunction. When leaders demand loyalty, it's usually about their insecurity, not about their mission. So the adaptive change she's working on is switching from loyalty to fidelity. What does it mean for us to become faithful to something bigger than us and to each other? And so you'll see this over and over and over again. If you're a leader, by the way, if you've ever worked with people who demanded that you were loyal, whoever accused you of disloyalty, think back and ask, was that a healthy thing or not? Almost every time you see a leader who's wagging a finger and punishing disloyalty, that is a toxic leader. And it happens in the church all the time. Think of how many times we have kept scandals underground, or we've had to be loyal to the church. That is usually dysfunctional. That is literally like becoming toxic because we can't handle the heat of honest conversation, clear conflict, good, healthy disagreement, the ability to be iron sharpening iron, to speak the truth in love. You start, if you're going to bring transformation, you got to start with a team of people who are more comfortable in the discomfort of the heat beginning to rise. Create a holding environment. Please.
So what keeps coming to my mind as you're speaking is this dance between being able to hold truth
Yeah.
and denial.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So a lot of what you've been saying, it's like I feel like the church in general, broadly spoken, has a hard time.
Oh, yeah, here. Could you please use the microphone because this is great.
I feel like the church in general has a hard time sitting with truth.
Yes.
And so to sit in a room where somebody says, we're an old congregation.
Yeah.
We're worshiping 22 people
Yeah.
on a Sunday.
Yeah.
That's our truth.
Yeah.
It is really hard to get people to just sit in that sentence
Yeah.
for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of
Yeah.
what you're saying is
Yeah.
we have to have a holding environment,
Yeah.
which is true on every level, in your family, in your marriage, in your church, in your community, doesn't matter, with your neighbors. Like, can we speak the truth? And of course, we're living in a culture where there's no such thing as truth. Everything is,
Yeah.
that's not the truth. But there are truths that we
Yeah.
can speak.
Yep.
And I think, speak for myself. I mean, there are truths in my own life where I just want to go, la, 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 la. Like, I don't want to know that truth.
Yep.
I don't want to know that truth because I don't know what I'm going to do
Yeah.
with that truth.
Yeah.
And I may be able to do nothing
Yeah.
except sit with it and grieve it and cry about it
Yeah.
and wait for the Holy Spirit to discern what should be preserved
Yeah.
and what needs to be
To be
changed. So
changed.
I think just this whole thing of can we speak the truth, which
Yeah.
is what you're talking about, fidelity. Like that's
Yeah.
one of my values.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that. I
Thank
think
you.
in general, mostly Lutherans here today, I'm Episcopalian, but we have a really hard time speaking the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I love that you said that because sometimes what we do is we do this. We go, yeah, hey, there's only 22 of us and we're getting old. And everybody goes, yes. And then they go this. But we love each other so much and we're so great. And if only we just got the word out of how loving it is to come here, they would of course come. And your assumption is, oh, we've got a marketing problem. Like I'm working with a seminary right now that said our biggest problem is we have a communication problem. So just fast forward. If communication is almost never the problem. It's almost, every church, every group we work with, they come back and go, we got a problem with communication. I'm like, if communication is your problem, you can fix it. Communicate.
It's like in a marriage.
Yeah.
Marriage shows up in my office, we have a communication problem.
Yeah, it's used that. It's usually something else. The communication is a symptom of something else. It's about lack of trust or lack of attention or lack of investment or disconnection. Okay, those things are harder. So literally, or in this case, the hard part is to say, we're going to have to be transformed for the sake of a mission. And that immediately starts changing the question. So you start with a holding environment. Just pay attention, just if you go nothing else out of this little piece, remember this. You don't lead by yourself. Quit trying harder and quit trying to do it alone. Quit trying to assume that if you are a trustworthy person, you're enough. If you're a trustworthy person, your job is to find other trustworthy people to join you. And then clarify your charism. And here's what I mean by charism. So charism is a Catholic word. And so if you ever hung out with Catholics, you'll hear this more often. I did a group that church planting missionaries in Appalachia. The head of that order did his project on charism at the Vatican. And the charism is the way Catholics talk about how within Catholicism there are different orders. So Pope Francis was a Jesuit, and Pope Leo is an Augustinian. They're both Catholics, but they came out of different orders. In California, where I spent most of my life, there is a Benedictine monastery just 40 miles outside of Los Angeles. You can literally drive out there. You show up, and assuming they got a room, they will send you to a small, really Spartan room, and they will basically invite you to prayer. And they pray throughout the day. They don't ask you if you're Catholic. They don't ask you if you're Christian. They just invite you to pray. And if you stay more than 2 days, they'll invite you to do some dishes. Because their charism, they believe the gift they offer the world is to teach people the integration of prayer and work. So everything they do is that's our gift we offer the world. So if you ever hung out with Jesuits, right? You're going to go find a Jesuit. You can't find a Jesuit monastery. They didn't start monasteries. They started Georgetown. They started universities. They started social justice programs. Why? Their charism was, we are the missionaries of the church who go any way in the world. And notice what I just did. I lifted my foot up off the ground. Their symbol is one person with a foot off the ground, ready to go anywhere in the world for the Spirit of God leads us. So the Jesuits didn't found monasteries. They did the spiritual exercises. So you could go anywhere in the world as a Jesuit, and what you knew is you were doing the same spiritual practices as every other Jesuit. That's their gift, right? I think every congregation has a charism. This is our gift. This is what makes us unique. This is what makes us different than the church that's in the junior high, that's got the rock band and the smoke machine. This is the one that makes us different than the big cathedral up the street. This is what makes us different than the other Lutheran church that is like our sister church, that every now and then someone says, oh, we should just merge. And you're like, how come we can't merge? And it's because we actually have two different gifts that we can't bring together very easily. And on occasion it does. Charism is the way of talking about the unique gift that is our church. And your charism is an expression not of your vision or your mission. That's another thing. It is an expression of your values. So I have this interesting thing in my life the last couple of years. I've just referred to it a couple of times already today. It's new. It's called a son-in-law. So my daughter marries Ben, and Ben is a remarkable guy. And Ben's at our house, and we're having dinner. And all of a sudden I noticed that as soon as the last fork hits the plate, Ben jumps up and clears the table. He just jumps up, clears the dishes. He doesn't have to say a word. It's like Pavlovian, like bing, boosh, dishes are gone. And I look at my wife and I go, we failed as parents. Our kids never do that. They never jump up and clear the table. Like we should have more Midwesterners around here. This is awesome. They just jumps up, clears the table. And I say that at dinner one night. I go, look, there goes Ben again. And I look at Allie, my daughter, his wife. I said, look, you never do that. And finally she goes, okay, Dad, enough of that joke. Ask Ben why he clears the table. I went, Ben, why do you clear the table? He goes, because my dad always cleared the table. And then Allie goes like this, and Ben, why does your dad always clear the table? And he goes, oh, because as soon as the table's cleared, we get to play games. I said, oh. He says, yeah, in their family, at the end of dinner, every night, you clear the table, and then we bring out the cards and we play games. And that's what their family does. I said, oh. He goes, so, yes, so I guess I clear the table thinking if we get the table cleared, we get to play games. Okay, yeah. He's like proud of himself that he finally saw that. Like, oh, that's so interesting. It was unconscious to him. It's just what he did. Now, in our family, my wife's a therapist, I'm a pastor, I'm Italian. We don't clear the table. We sit over the table, over dirty dishes, we open another bottle of wine, and we sit there telling stories till we cry. That's what we do. We share our feelings. That's what we do. So dinner tables are these long conversations where we love each other and we're crying. And Allie said, look, so we didn't pick up if we cleared the table, nobody would share a story. So that's why we sit here, right? Two different families, two different values, both equally powerful. Like Ben now is like the guy who goes, I just love the way you guys tell stories. As a matter of fact, I came with a question I want to ask. And my kids look at him like, you think you need to encourage mom? She's a therapist. She's going to ask you questions, right? It's like the most logical thing. It's natural. It's unconscious. Those are where your values come from. When I work with churches on this, we'll say, your values lead to your charism. Your values are your DNA. Your values are what make you who you are. Your values are more important. And this is when people say to us, oh, well, we've got a great set of values. Matter of fact, we put them in our bulletin every week. You can look at the values of First Church. And I'll say, well, where'd you get them? And they'll go, well, a group of us got together on a Saturday morning, and we got a bunch of pipe cleaners and Post-it notes, and we said, what should our church be about? What's the most important thing? And we asked, and we prayed and fasted, and we read some books, and we brought in a consultant, and they led us through this process, and we said, this is what we should be about. We should be about these things. And by the time we were done, we said, here are the 5 values of our church, that no matter what happens, this is what we should be about. And we looked at them, and we realized kind of with like this wonder, we realized that they spelled out something. Like the first one was generous, G, and reconciling, R, and accountable, A, and committed, C, and excellent, E, G, R, A, grace. Our values spell out grace. We're a grace church. And so now we have T-shirts that say join the grace and be the grace and, make grace great. And we have all these things that we talk about like oh, this is us. We're going to do this. This is us. These are our values. And I go, that's great, but those are not your values. Those are your aspirations. You know why I know that? Because you kept saying the word should. They're not. Your actual values come out of who you actually are. Like Ben jumping up, clearing the dishes. Like my kids sitting deeply, feeling comfortable about their feelings, and knowing that meals are a chance to connect. Quick story. My grandfather's name is Guido Evangelisti. That's true, Guido Evangelisti. I'm Italian on my mother's side. So the Bolsinger is my dad's side. Guido and Mary Evangelisti were my grandparents. My grandfather was an Italian immigrant. He came from Italy. He was escaping World War I. They were conscripting young boys. He was 16 years old. He makes his way to Ellis Island. Literally, I've been to Ellis Island last year, took my niece and her daughter, 4 generations of Guido's family, sitting there, seeing his name at Ellis Island. He made his way all the way across to California, meets my grandmother. They open an Italian restaurant. When I was 4 years old, I was babysat at their restaurant in the middle of the redwoods. I used to play in the forest. My grandmother would want me out. Todd, the crab was delivered today. Do you want raviolis or do you want the crab? I'm like, can I have both? She's an Italian grandmother. Of course. Right? Yeah, right? If you went to my grandmother's house for dinner and you opened the car door, you could smell the raviolis on the table from when the car door was open. We'd go racing in. And we'd get ready to eat, and she'd go, stop, we're saying grace. And we'd go, bless the Lord for these, I guess we're about to see the Lamb of Christ, Lord, amen. That fast. I was 20 before I figured out that wasn't Latin. I thought that was Latin. That was just English really fast, right? Because we wanted to eat. And my grandfather believed that family gathers around food. My grandfather also believed that if you got an education, you could be anything. So my grandfather got mad at my grandmother because she snuck off and got a driver's license because that old patriarch Italian believed that women shouldn't drive. But he had 2 daughters get master's degrees. And the first PhD in the family was not me, it was my cousin Lori. She got the first PhD in the family because education. Now, values are like that, passed down through the generations. Almost unconscious, just lived out. But here's what you need to know about my grandfather. He died when he was 60. before I was born, and I never knew him. But values are like that. So when my kids sit over a dinner table, they know Sunday suppers is where you build family. So even though my kids live in Seattle and Davidson, many Sunday nights I will call over their house and they'll be like, "You're calling in the middle of family supper." And it doesn't mean that I'm there. It means that they're building family, they're building community through a meal. That's what they do. They don't even think anything different about it. For my 60th birthday, all I wanted was a family supper. I flew them home. I can't even talk about it. I can't even talk about it. I said, "Wherever you are, I just need you to come home." And so they came home for 24 hours. They all had to go to work on Monday. But they showed up and we cooked dinner. And I opened the best wine I have, and we sat over there until we were crying. This is what we do, right? This is your values. The other thing you need to know about my grandfather is because he died when he was 60, and I never knew him, and I'm 61, and my kids are in no hurry to give me grandkids, I can't eat the way that old Italian ate. So what he called Tuesday night dinner, I call Christmas. You get that bolognese like once a year. And our family suppers, as much as I love Italian food, have a lot more salmon than he ever ate. Because I want to see grandkids. Your values are like that. They hold you and they adapt. So how do you get to your values? You don't get together by pulling a group of people together and say, "We should write our values." You get to your values by doing what I just did with you. You tell stories. You can do that this week. I've got an entire exercise. We have a little yellow book that actually tells you how to do this. You, like literally, you tell stories in this book, this little green book, it'll tell you. You get people together and you literally tell stories, like tell stories about a hero in the life of a church. Who's someone everybody should know? I did this on Zoom with an Episcopal church from New York City last week. I had them all bring a story. And they started talking about Norma, this older woman in the church who was pretty cranky and cantankerous. But the thing about Norma is once she saw you, she never unsaw you. And she learned you and your name, and she saw you. And then when she got older and people were beginning to say, "Who's this cranky woman who's running the church?" People would say, No, that's Norma. So you don't see her. She's been here forever. And they realized one of the values in their church is this is a place where you can come and be seen. And that wasn't an aspiration. They had stories behind it. You tell stories. When were you most proud of this church? When was the moment that we tell and say, "Look, we're far from perfect, but you should have seen us on this day. You should have seen when we did that." Like me talking about my grandfather, who was imperfect. He was an old Italian who, oh my gosh, the stories. But in this, when it came to families having food, when it came to education, that's what you do. You clarify your charism around your values, your core practices. The word we often use, we talk about is code. It's the unconscious things, like my son-in-law jumping up. Code is a very interesting word. I won't spend much time on it, but if you want to read about it, you can. Code actually comes out of the fact that, here's one example. People decide whether they're coming back to your church in 5 minutes. It's like you're thinking, if they just hear my sermon, they'll be great, or they hear a choir. No, they've already decided. They literally walked in and went, "I think our son-in-law would like it here. We're never coming back." And they don't even know why. It's completely unconscious. If you've ever traveled to like Italy and gone to Rome, to the Vatican, like been to St. Peter's, if you walk into St. Peter's, you'll notice this. Just someday, if you ever go in there, it's stunning. But walk in and look at people walking in the front door. And like literally walk in the front door, and all the Catholics, oh God, thank God I'm a Catholic, right? And all the Protestants, oh, thank God I'm a Protestant, right? They're overwhelmed by the same awe, but their response is different. That's unconscious. So much of what happens in a church is like, why do I resonate with that place? That's your code. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you unique. And that part is what you have to discover. Go ahead. I love that face. There's an irk coming. You go, man. You go. Yeah, you go.
But I want to be sensitive to it.
I don't know.
It's touching that you flew them back.
Yeah.
How do you distinguish between value?
Please, here, use the microphone. This is great. I can tell.
Yeah, how do you distinguish between value and tradition?
Boom.
And how is that example not going back up the curve?
Right. Yeah, so exactly. Thank you so much.
Did you just open a different bottle of wine?
Well, no,
and
here's
start anew?
the difference. No, this is such a great question. Here's the difference. My mother's generation was told, you got to live close enough to come to Sunday dinner every Sunday night. So when my mother moved us to Southern California, she spent her whole life feeling like she betrayed her parents. We said to our kids, you can go wherever God calls you. And they took us up on it. That was the stupidest thing we ever did. Right? Like they did. The difference is we didn't go back. We adapted that tradition. So when my kids talk about family suppers, they often mean we create community wherever we go over meals. So my kids are in their 20s and 30s, and they can outcook most people. And they know what it is to cook a dinner and what it means to call people together. And they understand hospitality. And they live in it, right? So the value goes forward. So the value adapts. And so when we talk about this, we realize every single time you ask the question, what do you preserve, what do you change? You're asking, which of our values do we preserve? And we're going to talk more about that, preserving. What do we adapt because we have to hold it in a different way? And then what do we let go? So I did this exercise with a church from Birmingham, Alabama. No, Montgomery, Alabama, excuse me. I saw Birmingham. This church was Montgomery. The pastor literally said to me, we started telling stories, and we started hearing stories like this. The story came out and it said, one of the things that we love about our church is we've always been involved in the civil rights movement. And someone said, we go back further than that. We've cared about racial injustice for years. And someone else said, no, this is in our founding. We have African Americans on the roll in 1833. And then somebody went, 1833. Were those enslaved people? Oh. See, we have part of our DNA is that we were slaveholders. Okay, what are we going to preserve? Even then, it was imperfectly a church that somehow people believe that we should be integrated in a way that is completely imperfect. Today, it looks different, right? Once they could own, part of our DNA we have to own is that we were slaveholders. But part of our DNA is also we were part of the civil rights leadership in Montgomery, Alabama. And today, we are not going to make decisions that make us less integrated. So when the most recent United Methodist Church split happened, this church stayed with the UMC because they said, we're not cutting off our connection to a tradition that we believe in. It's what do you preserve, what do you adapt, what do you discard? It's always all three. So we got rid of the patriarchy of my grandfather, but we kept the family values of education and right. So it's a great question. Remember, all along the way you're discerning, and we'll talk about why you're discerning. And this becomes the most important point, and we'll use this to go into our last part of the conversation before lunch. Create a holding environment. Clarify your charism. We tell people this. Once you're clear on what should never change, then you prepare to change everything else. That's not me. That's Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. Once you're clear on what should never change, that's our core values. Then we prepare to change everything else. And then pay attention to pain points. Pain points are what actually activate the change. And it's not the pain in the congregation. It's the pain in the world. That's what energizes us. How might our charism, which is the gift that we are that comes out of our values, us being our very best. Think of charism. In the old rabbinic tale goes like this. When you get to heaven and God judges you, he won't ask you why you weren't Moses. He'll ask you why you weren't you. He already had a Moses. He's not going to ask you, why weren't you like First Church, or why weren't you like this church or that church or this? He's going to ask you, why weren't you you? I needed you. How does that curve start? Need. Where's the need? Externally. The biggest problem, this is like the giant shift. This is the shift we got to get everybody to do. If you are trying to bring adaptive change because of the internal realities, you will never shift them unless you shift them for the external reality of the world. Our mission changes us. What is the pain point of our community? What is calling for our gift? Dallas Willard puts it this way. He goes, spiritual formation is you becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. It's you becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. It's not you becoming like Jesus. How do you become a 33-year-old Palestinian Jew who's single, who hung out with a bunch of people walking around? My wife literally asks it this way. Her goal, she says, my goal is for me to be who Jesus would be if she was a 60-year-old artist with a big dog, married to a guy who travels 100,000 miles a year, with kids who are scattered across the country. Spiritual formation is about you becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. I think the formation of a congregation is the congregation becoming who Jesus would be if Jesus was your congregation. If Jesus was walking through our community, who would he stop for? Who would he listen to? Oh, everybody. He didn't listen to everybody. He didn't stop for everybody. Go look at the New Testament again. There are all kinds of times when he went, no, I'm not sorry, it's not my time. I'm not dealing with you. Sorry, we're moving on to the next thing. There's people waiting for you. I know, we got to move on to the next thing. Sorry. Like, it's stunning how often Jesus will say, no. Somebody stops him, interrupts him. He goes, okay, all right, well, let the dead bury your dead. You want to follow me? Come. I'm not stopping for you. Who would he stop for in your community if he were you? What's the pain? I would say, if you want to solve the pain inside your organization, go outside for a while. So we actually have this exercise that we have people do. We literally give you ways to interview people in your community. Don't do a survey. Don't go look at the demographics. Don't find the most recent thing the real estate people told you about felt needs in this community. Just go talk to the people you know. Talk to the people who are one sphere out from your church. That's what I mean by in your community. One sphere out. They can't go to your church. Extra credit if they're not Christians, right? One sphere out. And ask them about their lives. Ask them, we have simple questions we give you, stuff like this. What do you love about living here? What's great about living in this community? If you were to tell somebody else what you love about it. Okay, what's not so great about being here? What makes it hard to live here? If good people came together to make it good for everybody to live here, what would you want them to do? And if you ask enough people, you'll really quickly get to deeper and deeper answers. So one of the churches I've worked with, I'll give you this, I love to tell this story about this church. One of the churches we worked with is in the second most diverse zip code in America. Second most diverse. The most diverse is in Elmhurst, Queens, New York. That's the most diverse zip code in America. I know that because I have a student and I have clients there. Most diverse. Anybody want to guess what the second most diverse zip code in America is? Anybody know? Setting you up. Irving, Texas. Irving, Texas is the second most diverse zip code in America. Mostly with South Asian immigrants and African immigrants, Muslims, mostly. Second most diverse zip code. There's a Bible church in Irving, Texas, Irving Bible Church. You can hear by the name, conservative place, right? Conservative. One of our clients, one of the guys that I've been coaching for 4 years, he said, our value, our charism is we've always been a church that loves our neighbors. We've always been a missional church. We've said the mission field is not sending money over seawater. It's sending our people to their neighbors and friends to share the good news. That's who we are. It's what we've always been. He said, our neighborhood has changed. What are the mountains? Our community is becoming more diverse. So he said, so what is the shift that we need to start making? Change of values, attitudes, and behaviors. We need to be more a place that our neighbors will feel a sense of belonging. We need our neighbors to know that here, they might have come from all over the world, but here's a place where they can find community and belonging. That's our values. So they began to shift, and they are the most multi-ethnic church I've ever seen outside of New York City. They are stunning in Irving, Texas. And they don't do it by talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. In that church, oh God, no, you'd never use those words. They do it by talking about stuff like Acts chapter 8, Galatians chapter 3, Revelation chapter 9. Notice what it looks like in the kingdom. And they start talking about this, and they start realizing we need to become people who reflect our neighborhood, because the pain of our neighbors is they move here and they don't have a sense of community. The people who move here are recent immigrants. That's the pain that we're responding to. That's what we're good at. That's what we're going to be. And so then you ask this question, how might that inspire us to faithfully change and grow? How does our charism toward that pain point lead us to transformation? That's the question they begin to ask. And when they begin to do that, you start asking these larger questions. What are we going to have to change internally for our church's charism to be an expression of God's mission outwardly toward the pain of our community? That's the question that they had to ask themselves. And that's what they've been working on for 4 years. And today they are an incredibly diverse congregation. They only have one problem. And the problem is that pastor, who's one of the most gifted pastors I've ever heard, preaches every single week to 500 empty seats. Because today they're 2,000 members and really diverse and beautifully vibrant, but they used to be 5,000 members. And there was a time when they thought they were going to be 10,000 members, when the neighborhood was homogeneous, and they were going to be just another white megachurch. And so today, here they are, changing for their missional values. And the pastor says, this is what we're about. And this is the shift. Here's the loss. What's the canoes? Here's the loss. We're going to lose people who don't want to be part of a church that looks like our neighborhood. Because people walk up to him and say stuff like, if you'd stop all that woke stuff, we could start growing again. And he's like, this isn't about being woke. This is about being Acts chapter 8, Galatians chapter 3, Revelation chapter 9. It's about living out our values in our neighborhood. What has changed? The mountains have changed. What's changed? Our neighborhood's changed. What's not changed? Our value to offer people the good news of Christ in a community. That hasn't changed. So we will change for it. See, this is the gap. This is a gap between so many of us. The default behavior for most organizational leaders is to want to solve the problems for our organization. It's the people sitting in the pews going, how can we get 500 more people in here? How can you make it more like the way it used to be? How can we make it comfortable for us? When the adaptive shift is to make it the shift for the sense of the world that has changed. The transformation we have to go on for meeting the needs of the world. I was having this conversation at Fuller Seminary. So if you know anything about theological education, it's been in decline, just like the church, right? And it's been in pretty dramatic decline in most settings. Now, there are some church schools who are beginning to do some stuff, and they're seeing some movement, but by and large, most mainline and older historic seminaries are struggling. And when I came to the school, my job was to basically help us think about that problem from an adaptive sense. And I came on to do a couple of big old projects with them. And I finished the first one and turned that over, and that was doing well. And they asked me to take on the second one, which is the more and more we talk to our people, we realized the people didn't need our degrees. Less and less churches, you need to have a master's degree to be a pastor in a church, especially in more non-denominational or Pentecostal environments where we get a lot of our students. They don't need our degrees, and they really don't want our debt. Like, we don't want to live in a world where we have to carry a bunch of debt, so we're not quite sure we want to be in this ministry thing. So my job was to take that on. How do we address that changing world? Those are the mountains. How do we address it? I gave the first bit of a plan to the trustees. When I finished with the trustees, I said, here's where we're going to experiment, here's what we're going to work on, here's how we might have to bring change. The trustees voted to give me that job. They let me put together a whole brand new division. I had to organize people to it, but they told me I had to raise all the money, I had to recruit all the people, and if we lost the money and lost the people, we'd lose the project. Like, in other words, we can't invest anything in it, but you can go. And I went, what a good idea. So I took that on. A guy comes to me and says, what you're talking about doing is something really, really innovative in a really traditional institution. Traditional institutions do not change easily. I'm talking to Lutherans, you guys know that, right? You think that yours is hard? Theological education is an 1,100-year-old business model that goes back to monasteries. People think seminary, they think monastery. So here we are talking about trying to change the entire idea of doing theological education. He goes, you know that usually doesn't work. I go, so what do I do? He goes, well, do you know the Saturn car from General Motors? Remember the Saturn car? The Saturn car was developed in the 1980s by General Motors to basically compete with Japanese imports. In 1994, it had the 6th highest selling car in America. In 2008, they sold it off for parts to preserve the legacy brands. He said, Todd, you're going to be the Saturn of Fuller Seminary. Like, that's what's going to happen. I said, well, how do I avoid that? He goes, why don't you get with people who do genuine innovation all the time and see what you can learn from them? So I said, great. He invites me to come to Silicon Valley. That's where his law practice is. He puts me in a boardroom with a bunch of people from all the tech companies that we know are very famous, including some of the ones on social media. They're all Christians. They're all, what did I just do? There we go. Okay, so I just see here, don't touch this. They're all there. They're all Christians. And they said to me, Todd, you get 10 minutes. Tell us your best idea. What is your best idea? And here's what we want to know is it such a good idea that if it was a business, we would invest in it? I said, oh. He goes, no, we're not giving you any money. It's just the way we think about whether an idea is good. If this was a business, would we want to invest in it? So go ahead, give us your best idea, and you got 10 minutes. I finished my 10 minutes. I look around the room, and they're all doing this like side-eye thing, like, somebody going to tell him? And I went, what? And they said, so you've been doing that talk around the seminary a lot, haven't you? I said, yeah, I told you. I got to like raise all the money, and I got to get the development team on board. I got to hire all the staff, which means they're going to have to come on my team, which is soft money, which if I don't raise the money, they lose their jobs. Yeah, I got to get the faculty on board. You can't do anything if the faculty don't agree. So you got to get them on board, and they always don't want to be on board with anything. Yeah, so yeah. I've been doing that around the seminary. He goes, great, because your big idea was this. We have to do this. Because if we don't do this, the seminary won't survive. Todd, nobody cares if your institution survives. They only care if your institution cares about them. So get out and find out what they care about and how you can meet that need. And this will begin to transform your church. This begins, right? We start actually looking differently. We start realizing that we can't solve it. But we start realizing that the big shift we have to make is to transform our institutions for the sake of the pain of the world. And it doesn't mean that we take on everything. It means we start asking ourselves really clear, discerning questions. What is ours to do? And how might that change us? So for Irving Bible Church, it meant we are going to look more and be more welcoming to our neighbors. For St. Peter's Episcopal in Chelsea, it meant we are going to be a place where people who have walked away from the church can encounter God in a gracious environment. For other churches, what it means is we get really clear on what we're called to work on, and we make all of our changes based on that. Because it's about our values. And once we're clear on what will never change, we then get clear, ready to change everything else.